Psalm 26, verse 3. On the front lines. If armies in camp should stand together against me, my heart shall not fear. If a battle should rise up against me, in this will I be confident. Psalm 26, verse 3, Douay Rheims. We have in English the expression, when it rains, it pours, to describe the manner in which misfortunes or evils seem to coalesce together. That is, it is not simply that one bad thing occurs, but rather that a lot of unfortunate things tend to cluster together, which only adds to the melancholy of the experience. This is, to be fair, probably more often than not a matter of perception, for in the midst of misfortune we also have a tendency to self-pity, and while we generally don't wish for extra evils to be heaped upon us, there can be within that inward turn towards self-pity a certain twisted delight in having so many misfortunes occur, or, to be more honest, for us to complain to others about. For if we must undergo things we do not desire, there is always the temptation to find a sympathetic ear which will confirm us in the uprightness of our actions and the utter unfairness of what we must undergo. And when that itch is scratched, we can be very willing to look for more troubles to afflict us, even if they may be of little import, whatever it takes to allow the pride to puff up a little, for just look how I am suffering so bravely. Against this inflation of miseries for the sake of pride stands the words of the Psalmist, who speaks not of evils perceived, but rather evils multiplied in opposition to his uprightness. The enemies which desire to eat his flesh do so because he is the Lord's anointed, and in his innocence of heart he suffers unjust persecution. In his prayer to the Lord, he is not seeking consolation or pity or an affirmation of how badly he is suffering, and isn't he oh so brave. Instead, he orients the entirety of the persecution he suffers around his confidence and hope in the Lord. That is, it is not about his suffering per se, nor about how unjust it is, for the virtue of hope that he holds in his heart will not abide either pride or pity to touch him. The opposition from his enemies is entirely within the providence of God, and thus even if it pours when it rains, it is of no consequence, for the Lord is his light and salvation. He speaks of not simply one enemy opposing him, but of armies in camp standing together against him. There are therefore multiple enemies who are putting aside whatever differences they may have for the express purpose of opposing him, of coming against him in union to destroy him. They create a camp together which describes the fortification of their designs against him, and the deliberate manner in which the assault will be conducted. That is, this is not a surprise attack or an ambush, but a well-organized assault to bring him down to death. He can see it coming, they know he can see it coming, and the expectation is that such a demonstration of force will demoralize him and cause him to despair of life, or even to come over to their side. Quote, "But if the multitude of gainsayers conspire to stand together against me, my heart will not fear, so as to go over to their side." St. Augustine, Expositions on the Psalms, 26:3. But because of the strength of the virtue of hope within the psalmist's soul, even this scenario does not fill him with fear. He says, "My heart shall not fear." The verb timebit in the future indicative active underscores this act of his will, for in the face of such overwhelming opposition he chooses to not fear. That is, my heart shall not fear. The deliberation of his enemies and their designs against him is mirrored by his deliberation to hope in the Lord and to not fear. And there is a correlating movement between his intensity of hope and their intensity of opposition. In contradiction to the normal mode of our natural selves, the more his enemies press against him, the more he will not fear. Ultimately, it is in the battle which rises up against him in which his resolve and hope is tested and proved. For armies in camp are a threat, but the battle is when swords and blood are drawn. The anticipation of evil is what gives fear its teeth, such as when the armies stand together in camp, threatening destruction and death. But when the battle is joined, the anticipation gives way to reality, and fear to despair. But as the psalmist does not fear, and thus does not feel the sting of the coming conflict, neither does he give way to despair. His hope is rather turned into confidence once the battle is joined, for hope anticipates the good to come, and confidence brings it into experiential reality, for his hope, which has been tested, is now proved. Quote, "If a battle should rise up against me, in this I will be confident." A camp could remain inactive and not assemble for battle, but now he appends the savage conflict itself, so that he should be seen to fear none of the things which humanity considers frightening. If it should rise up, in other words, if a sudden concerted attack like a seething storm should burst out against me, I will be confident of victory in such a battle. When battles are joined, the glory of the victor is always in evidence, for his underlying courage, which has not been tested in battle, is now proved. Cassiodorus' Explanation of the Psalms, 26:3. The psalmist's hope and confidence is not predicated on his prowess in battle or his brilliance in strategy. It is far more basic in that he has full confidence that God will reward the innocent and bring salvation to those who cleave to him. This perspective allows him to not despair when the troubles and trials of the world and the flesh and the devil rail against him, for whether it rains or pours, he has the Lord as his light and salvation. The evils of this world can only afflict his body, but they cannot touch his soul, which is united in charity and uprightness with the Lord. The irrational hatred of the demons and of men under their sway for the ways of righteousness may in fact cause them to afflict him precisely because of his uprightness. But that is even less reason to fear their machinations, for I set the Lord always in my sight, for he is at my right hand, that I be not moved. Psalm 15, verse 8, Douay Rheims. The warfare of this life is an incessant one, and in the midst of exile we face the tyranny of sin and evil in this world, which seeks to draw us into its camp or to destroy us. We are tempted to despair when we see the multiplicity of evils arrayed against us, and this temptation can cause surrender or, sometimes even worse, a manner of taking things into one's own hands, as if the outcome is within our own power. The lure of self-pity can be equally mirrored by a self-martyrdom. In all these temptations, the psalmist cautions away from fear and despair, towards confidence and hope. In this life, the war will never be complete, but exists in part to prove us, to allow virtue to be purified in the crucible of suffering. The outcome of the battle is not in our hands. It is rather our part to take up arms and stand in faith and charity. Quote, "For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and power, against the rulers of the world of this darkness, against the spirits of wickedness in the high places. Therefore take unto you the armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and to stand in all things perfect." Ephesians chapter 6, verses 12-13, Douay Rheims. This perfection of standing that St. Paul speaks of corresponds to the psalmist's decision to not fear in the face of whatever evils may befall him. The amount or intensity of them is irrelevant to this resolve, for the greatness and goodness and charity of God far surpasses even all possible evils joined together. No matter what the world and the devil might throw at him, if his heart cleaves to the Lord, there can be nothing to fear. Their terrors and attempts to draw him to despair become the means by which his virtues are solidified and increased, and this becomes the manner of victory over sin and evil. For just as our Lord conquered death by his death and overcame sin by the outpouring of himself in charity, even so the afflictions of temptation and evil burn away the dross of attachments to this world and bring out the purity of virtue all the more, so that the perfections of the saints in charity are the overthrowing of sin's hold over them. Quote, "Son, when thou comest to the service of God, stand in justice and in fear, and prepare thy soul for temptation. Humble thy heart and endure. Incline thy ear, and receive the words of understanding, and make not haste in the time of clouds. Wait on God with patience, join thyself to God, and endure, that thy life may be increased in the latter end. Take all that shall be brought upon thee, and in thy sorrow endure, and in thy humiliation keep patience. For gold and silver are tried in the fire, but acceptable men in the furnace of humiliation." Sirach chapter 2, verses 1-5, Douay Rheims. "If armies in camp should stand together against me, my heart shall not fear. If a battle should rise up against me, in this will I be confident." Psalm 26, verse 3, Douay Rheims.